face or some cute picture or something. But I don't care. That can happen at any point.
Just get a picture of milk. I feel like that's
Yeah,
your
right. That's my jam now, isn't
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Rohan, why so Klein is, despite my feelings about him, is definitely someone that people focus on. I mean, Gavin Newsom just shouted him out. He just had that book with Derek Thompson, whom I much prefer from the two, but doesn't get the same level of recognition. Whatever, it's fine. So I wanted to hear why Ezra in particular.
why I'm like taking a
Why
look
you're
at his
focused on
podcast.
him? Yeah.
Because I think that he has a very good way of like modulating his opinions and like his views to be perfectly acceptable to like the New York Times crowd, right? Like that, it's really just, like I'm sure there's certain things where he disagrees, but he knows to kind of hide that and make it extremely palatable to his particular audience, right? In that sense, it kind of reminds me of guys like Richard Reeves and stuff, right? Like they'll advocate for men in a way that's perfectly palatable to like a broader audience, right? So in that sense, like it's not going to be alienating, right? So you can think of Ezra Klein as kind of like a Swiftie. Like he's kind of, Taylor Swift is for the broad audience, right? He like what she's going to give you, right? You know what her market is. There's a perfect like product market fit there, right? And so what Taylor Swift provides in music, Ezra Klein provides in opinions, right? So I think like if you,
Good Lord, yeah.
yeah, so it's so like he'll never like venture too far off from like the orthodoxy that his audience kind of expects. And it's like every time I hear the abundance discourse, like really what does it boil down to? It's literally like, oh, we need to start doing things. It's like there really is nothing beyond that. It's like, oh, actually it turns out that having a process where you have to do a request for proposal just to get a request for proposal is not a good way to run government, right? Like spending $50 billion or however much it is on a rail line that doesn't exist yet, that's bad. And it's like I can't believe you need a book to tell you that. I feel like you can go to like some somebody who like is a mailman on the street and go like, hey, do you think it's a good investment to spend $50 billion and not have a railway line? But I mean, again, it's just a package, right? You need someone to tell you things in a package that you will personally gravitate to, right? In the sense, it kind of reminds me of that one Democrat with he got a stroke. If you know what I'm talking about, like
Fetterman.
Fetterman,
yes,
yeah.
yeah. So like he himself is like, in my opinion, he actually resembles kind of like a Sanders, even though his politics is different, where he's got that working class vibe and a certain aesthetic to him, right? He, for whatever reason, shows up to like
hoodie and chin puff combo. Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah. So it's like these things matter. Like you need to be able to say things in a way that kind of land with your like your base or whatever. So that hopefully that answers your question, Baz. Like that's kind of why I've been going back and sort of listening to the stuff that he says and focusing on it.
No, that's super reassuring, actually. Because at first I thought you were going to him for his ideas, but it sounds like what you're going for is his rhetoric.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
He was talking to Hassan Minaj of all people, which I know that sounds really stupid, but I think they're about at equal levels of intelligence. I mean, I like Hassan Minaj. You know what? We'll leave that aside. But he was saying that the party is, and I know I'm sure other people have said this, that Democrats are really obsessed with process over outcomes. Like if you follow the right process, right, that in itself is like a moral good. And I couldn't help but compare that to the sort of feminized managerial bureaucracy of like corporate America and government. And it's a really the thing is, he could take it all the way. He's not an idiot. Like many of these thinkers, actually Rob Henderson included, could take it a little bit further, and they could see like shall we say, the personality of the two, I don't know, broad sides of this political spectrum. And they could draw the conclusion that is like ontologically feminized, but they don't. And I think that's on purpose. They can't possibly not see, like they can't possibly not see what it is to the conclude, like what the conclusion is of their initial thought.
Yeah, which is
Yeah,
why you need a guy. Yeah, go ahead, David.
well, so I was, Ezra's an interesting one for me because I always found him kind of like what Rohan said. I think he's a pretty vanilla guy. Um, and I think most of the abundance discourse is sadder commentary on the function of government than anything it might be saying about Ezra. But one of the things I learned when I worked in government was that so much of the nuts and bolts and so much of the stuff that's just like the keep the lights on and keep the toilets flushing is completely ignored by the political commentariat, and it's ignored by the people who watch Fox News
Yes.
and watch MSNBC. And because most of the time, frankly, it's kind of a good thing that it's ignored because the people who are like craziest and want to write about politics and sound off on politics probably wouldn't be very good at the nuts and bolts stuff. But when it gets ignored for so long, you get this inertia and you get systems that really don't work well. And I think Ezra just kind of shining a spotlight on this subroutine that most of us ignore is why the abundance discourse is so resonant. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes sense because actually they don't talk about the failures of democratic government. Like he's actually weirdly enough broken relatively new ground. Well, not relatively. I'm sorry. There have been other writers who have done this, but they have been less well known. So he's just kind of his tier, the New York Times crowd deciding that it is okay. And in many ways, actually, what Ezra delivers is an important service because he makes certain things palatable to the New York Times crowd that they would otherwise reject from anyone else. He was one of the first people to say that Biden should step down, actually,
Yeah.
among the MSM. That counts for something, I think.
Oh, sure. And now I want to hear from Baz because I think Baz has the spiciest take on Ezra, and I want to hear what it is.
I just think he's a charlatan. Sorry. I think. I mean, I think he's useful in the sense that the way Rohan is kind of studying him, in that he is able to package ideas for a very particular consumer, and I think that's something that's necessary, and I think that's something that we've talked about before, where you know I find personally that my articles do better when I say, well, there's there's two ways my articles can do well. One, if I'm sort of outright, or I guess inflammatory in some way. The other is if I'm vague in pointing fingers at who is responsible, for the thing, and that is largely my like problem with abundance in the abundance narrative, in that it doesn't there are no villains. When you look at Trump, when you look at MAGA, when you look at the right, there's a story there. There's something that's sort of narratively coherent, and you know who the good guys are and you know who the bad guys are. In abundance, from what because I just started reading the book a couple like a week or so ago. There is no story. There are no bad guys. Things just happened. And I don't think you can sell that politically. So
Mistakes were made.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well then who made, that's the natural question. Who made these mistakes? That's not up for discussion. And I think that's smart. I think that's useful to Ezra's means, but I don't know how much you can sell that politically. But I could be wrong. I mean, like I said, Gavin Newsom just shouted him out. So
And so you think, Baz, that Ezra probably has a pretty good idea, actually, of who the protagonists and the antagonists in this story
I think
are.
everyone does.
He's not naming them because he wants a kind of broad appeal.
He doesn't want to piss women off, you guys. That's the answer.
I think that's probably.
Well, who are the groups? Yeah. Who are the groups, right? Iglesias, the other, I guess Baz would probably call him a charlatan. And Ezra and like Nate Silver, all of these guys have circled around this whole groups thing. But who predominantly staffs the groups? Like we
Right.
all know the composition of nonprofits and advocacy groups and just activists in general. The ones who are making puritanical demands are women. I mean, that's why I guess I'm not surprised that all these dudes are not taking it all the way, because they know that there is going to be backlash involved. They're not willing to actually name it. And you know what? This brings me to another point that perhaps maybe segues to feminism, right? So you three are critics of feminism. I'm a critic of feminism. And you three do, of course, name the problem. But in many, like, there's several of my readers who hold the opinion that this is not a fight for men to have because the cost isn't worth it. But if men don't have the fight with women, like in their lives, then, well, the culture is not going to change. Then it's just me shouting into the wind and women like me. What do you all have to say about that, if anything?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is, I mean, I'm going to confess, I'm glad that you were the one who raised this point and who raised this topic, because I think that
Amen,
makes it
brother.
more okay for the rest of us to weigh in.
That's so funny.
But no, I mean, I think that's absolutely the case. And you sort of, Democrats and the left, and to the extent that there's crossover, both really walk themselves into a corner with 10 years of a mega dose of identity politics, because then when people went, okay, you know what, I'll accept that premise. Maybe some groups do things differently, and maybe not all of those things are awesome. It all of a sudden everyone threw their hands up and said, whoa, we don't want to have that conversation. We want to talk about how men are shit. That's fun, and that's, we think, harmless. Now, I don't think it is harmless, but if it's, well, actually predominantly this is a behavior more associated with women and that women find more appealing than men do, now really you are on risky territory if you're a man and you're talking about that. Baz and Rohan, do you find that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wrote an entire post recently talking about how the abundance agenda is an anti-feminist agenda, right? So I think now
I read that, yeah.
Yeah. So I basically, like, now we're seeing the opposite side of that gender divergence, right? Because, originally the way that it was framed is that, the men are shifting right. That's bad. We need to do something about it. There was, as far as I can tell, maybe you guys saw it differently, but the corollary for women was just not there, right? The fact that they were kind of hyper liberalizing, especially the younger cohorts. There just wasn't the same degree of, like, I guess, panic or sort of negative backlash or anything. If anything, that was just kind of seen as natural, right? And the point I was making there is precisely a point that you and Anu are making right here, is that, when you have an extremely feminine, when you have a party that prioritizes feminine virtues, which is things like equality, fairness, representation, making sure everyone has a voice, then what you get is a party of processes, right? You need everyone to kind of weigh in. You need everyone to kind of have the ability to veto things or block things or make sure that things don't happen, right? And so the very blunt truth is that you can't have a party that represents everybody and a party that gets things done fast, right? Like you need to, there's just a trade-off there. So like now, if you want to move faster, if you want a government that builds things, as Recline says, well, then you need to start cutting people out of the process. Like at the end of the day, you need some activist groups that you can just stick your middle finger to and say, okay, like, yeah, we get your point, but that's not the priority right now, right? Not every. Yeah.
Well, so I mean, Trump is a huge piece of this too, isn't he? Because I mean, I've written about this. I don't approve of a great deal of what Trump is doing, but one thing I think he is showing people is that autocracies are very nimble, and you can achieve a lot very, very quickly, and then you can undo it just as quickly if it turns out to be very unpopular. And if it sounds like I realize that kind of sounded like I was being approving, and it's not. But I do think we are being shown for the first time in most of our lifetimes an alternative to clunky, bureaucratic morass, which is what is sort of just been the order of business for decades and decades.
Yeah, I just to quickly jump in there, I've been toying with that this idea as well. I think people forget that there are upsides to monarchy. And there are going to be contexts where people are going to prefer monarchy. over, a representative democracy. I wanted to ask you a question. I was going to call you Ghostwin. I've never called you Ghostwin. Ro, before I forget it, but you made this really interesting connection between between bureaucracy and the feminine, and I was hoping you could tease that out a bit more, because to me the natural counter to that is, well, look at European systems that are tradition we're traditionally dominated by men. Those are a bit more egalitarian, right? Those are pretty process. I mean, the Germans are very process focused. Is it fair to label that as a feminine system?
I mean, I can't really speak that much to the individual
Fair enough.
Countries in Europe. Like, to be honest, I just don't know much about it. But it does seem to me that right now, a lot of them, like, I'll just watch like YouTube videos of like different like updates of politics in different parts of Europe, and it does seem to me that even places like Germany, like they don't even have like good Wi-Fi over there. They don't have a lot of like a lot of innovative technologies over there, just because like they don't take out debt, or they don't have like a mindset for innovation. It's very much thinking inside of the box. And again, I don't know much about like the different countries in Europe, but it does seem to be like a general problem where relative to the sort of human capital that they have, like the wages are kind of stagnating. There's not really a whole lot of technologies coming from these different industries. I guess what is it, Sweden or Finland, where like they have like Novo Nordisk and all these GLP-1 drugs. Like, I guess maybe that's kind of a bright spot. But beyond that, there's really nothing coming from those countries, right? So overall, I mean, the point that I was trying to build off of was one that actually one of the George Mason University econ guys was making in his podcast with Ezra Klein, where it was just pointing out that, when you have systems, and it's not just government systems, right? These are like homeowner associations, NGOs, all these corporations, right? I think like when you see the gender composition of them, you do see like the more quote unquote activist they get, it's also more feminine they get, right? And so I think like just as it boils down to, there's kind of like a biological foundation for some of our political beliefs, some of the way that we think about things and sort of try to find solutions for things. And I think like, I would say like Doge and a lot of the like some of the stuff there is kind of one failure mode, right? Where it's just kind of all action, no real planning, right? We're just going to fire people. All right, you guys in USAID, you're gone. This government, they're going to start messing with that. I think they started messing with like postal workers and all that, right? It's just, we'll just fire the gun in all these different directions, and it's just change for the sake of change, right? So that to me looks like a more masculine failure mode, right? It's just pure testosterone kind of thinking, whereas the opposite of that is kind of where you get into a Kafkaesque bureaucracy where nothing is actually happening, and it's just like I would say, like, we're just trying to get so many opinions and so many people into the room that everything is kind of left to sort of this consensus decision making.
Sorry, dead air.
Sorry.
Anu, are you okay? Cool.
Sorry. I'm back.
Welcome back.
I don't know how much of that Anu heard. I'm kind of waiting for her to talk now.
Unfortunately, I missed all of Rowan's response. I'm sorry. You're going to have to give me the cliff notes.
So, I mean, I think the cliff notes was that if we can kind of ascribe masculinity or femininity to a mode of operation in government, and if we are willing to say that the kind of Kafka, we're going to spend $50 billion on a railway that never gets built, is the product of kind of what I think you, Anu, would call managerial class feminism. And if we're going to say that Doge is like the absolute masculine id of just hard charging, fuck the consequences, damn the torpedoes, all of that, is there some balance in there? And do you agree with that framework?
Yes, I do think that parties have okay. Government and actually institutions, I think, end up having masculine and feminine energies in them because, well, they are composed of people. So average personality traits cluster, and you have amplification effects. Like, say you have a bunch of neurotic people in any group, the group is going to tend toward even more extreme levels of neuroticism as they feed off each other. Corporations have also taken on this kind of quality. Government is famously risk averse, right? That is, I would say, an ontologically feminine category. I'm sure at least one person listening will accuse me of essentialism for saying that. Obviously, we can't. So, Occupy Wall Street is a case study in what happens when you overemphasize consensus and process over actually doing things. And Occupy Wall Street didn't have any demands behind it, and it therefore it didn't achieve anything, right? And that's how, at the time, I thought it was a class-based uprising, but it was actually just over, like, elites who didn't have, suddenly had lost hope of upward mobility or otherwise reaching where their parents already were, reacting badly and taking it out on the elites above them. So it was an elite class positioning strategy, and it was primarily driven by, shall we say, feminine modes of communication and organizing. Women are famously against hierarchy, and it had evolutionary purposes behind it, right? We had to cooperatively raise children in a damn community, and intuitively, according to the research on female intersexual competition, women and girls know that they should not show themselves to be overtly better in any domain than, like, their female friends, because they know that doing so will cost them the friendship. There is a sort of enforced sameness. And this, I think, maps on well to Marxism and the idea of equity over equality, or of opportunity, for example. Can there be a balance? I just don't know. I mean, there needs to be, obviously, but the what the organization values has to be different, right? Like, outcomes have to be, achieving something has to be a virtue. The process has to, you have to know when to discard the process, right? Like, men are inherently more likely to break rules, just biologically speaking. I mean, they actually, boys start playing far away from their teachers, further away from teachers than girls at a pretty early age. So
That's so
you
interesting.
have to
I didn't know
know,
that.
isn't it?
Wow.
Read Warriors and Warriors, man. I don't know which reader recommended it to me, but it changed my fucking life, that book. Suddenly everything made sense. And so you have to have a balance, and you have to value credentials less. That's actually a big part of the problem. That's how this process over outcomes thing gets reinforced, is that we value the wrong signals when deciding who to hire for things. And with that, I will rest my case.
The book is called Warriors. I'm Amazoning it right now. What is it?
Warriors and Worriers by Joyce Benenson.
All right.
Worriers as in Worries.
Awesome. Okay.
That's
And
definitely going on my readings.
I'm curious. This is another question for the group. And by the way, when I'm asking these questions, they're not. I kind of feel bad about earlier. I'm not trying to, like, they're not gotcha questions. I'm just trying to think out loud. So one of the things I'm trying to reconcile is this idea of I guess a feminized I guess legislative, I don't know what you'd call it, I guess feminized government, with this idea that I don't know. I just feel like when I try to lean in when it comes to the Democrats and try to figure out what's happening on a policy level, I don't see something that's very robust. And so the thing I'm trying to figure out is whether that is part of it or whether that's just something that's. Did you kind of see where I'm going? I don't know if the group understands.
I think I do. I think I do, Baz. And I think, I've been noticing this a lot with what the right would call Trump derangement syndrome is so often focused on Trump having transgressed against a norm or a system. Or it's that the complaint is always, well, that's not how we do this. And a lot of the time, the big beautiful bill would be a big exception to this because Democrats hate it, the left hates it. There's a lot in there to hate if you're on the left. But Trump, in the macro, is just an offense to the system that we have. And I think because the Democratic Party is bleeding men so horrifically, and who's left making decisions in the Democratic Party are, to go back to what Hanga said, are women who really value those processes in a way that men don't, and men are kind of more attracted to this rule-breaking swagger that Trump has. That, I think, is a big explainer of why we are seeing such a demographic shift in party makeup. I mean, I think that kind of might be the whole thing.
The rule breaking is satisfying. I'm not gonna lie. Like lots of things are making me like not. I'm scratching my head, and the financial crisis is totally possible. But the Harvard thing, I will admit, that was like red meat for me.
Oh, I loved it.
It wasn't it. I mean, David, you wrote a thing about fuck. I think it was titled "Actually Fuck Harvard." Why?
That was it.
Yes. And so there's something deeply satisfying about it, is there not?
Oh, there absolutely is. And Harvard, here's the thing. If you are going to be averse to rule break, to really teach in East Asia, and my students, who are mostly amazing, just don't have a prayer at getting into a place like Harvard. And it's because, even the American ones, and it has a lot to do with their skin color. And I'm sorry, fuck that. I don't know when it became okay that elite universities decided that South and East Asian people were boring and they didn't want that many of them. But that's actually not a rule that I like. I don't know about full meritocracy, but certainly more of it than, ooh, sorry, we don't like how you look, so we're going to find all of these clever ways to hold back your prospects at getting in. And no, absolutely, Trump taking a flamethrower to them was gloriously satisfying to watch because they deserved it. Because they were thumbing their nose at the Civil Rights Act and at my fucking students. And sorry, it really, they pissed me off with that.
I appreciate your passion for it. And what's funny is that they'll flout the Civil Rights Act when it comes to that. And Asian Americans, and I guess South Asian Americans technically are a separate category, though none of it really makes any sense. We're one of the fastest growing demographic groups, right? And so it should matter. And weirdly, Indians have become kind of like the Illuminati, globally speaking. I don't know. It suddenly seems everywhere. Like Indians are heavily populating the elite, and I think that's actually part of it. I read some research on elite college admissions back in the day because I knew that it was stacked against me, and it's remarkably like how the Jews were treated throughout especially in the early 20th century when a bunch started gaining admissions to these elite institutions, that they needed to be preserved for WASPs and that sort of thing. And there were like creative ways to exclude Jews. And the same thing happens for Asians, though I don't even know if I don't know that it's as simple as race. I think it's that the personality score thing, I think that's actually explicit in that I wonder if Asians of any kind are being coded in this like sort of effeminate way where Black people and Latino people might be coded in a sort of more masculine and cool way, is just a theory that popped into my head. I don't know. What do we think?
I think like overall that's probably true. I just think it's also like right now it's just straight like optical reasons, right? Like I think a lot of these universities realize that if it was just based on test score, like the culture in India and China and Korea, they would dominate places like this, right? So like I was reading a graph about like the income distribution at these universities. And weirdly enough, it's like the bottom part of the income distribution is overrepresented. The top part of the income distribution is way overrepresented. So it's the middle part that kind of misses out with all of these things, right? If you're just a regular person, you know, God forbid, like you're never gonna make it into these places. But coming back to a previous point, David, I wanted to add to something you said previously, where it is a little bit satisfying because a lot of times the violations that Trump makes are things that they will let slide for their own team, right? They being sort of the left, the Democrats.
Yeah.
So when Trump takes those same violations and cranks it up to 100, it falls flat because they can always just point to something where they go, well, you did this as well, right? So an easy to point out is kind of like the you know, I'm sure you guys have heard of it. There was that guy who got deported, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. You know, hey, we need to. He was on the news cycle endlessly, right? Hey, we need to bring him back. This is not how it's done. This is violating process, right? But then they're curiously silent on the matter of like letting millions and millions and millions of people into the country without any of the due process, right? So people can see that. They go, okay, what happened to the due process when people were flooding in, right? One guy leaves, one guy is deported. And again, I'm not saying I agree like with his deportation. I'm saying that the amount of coverage that this issue gets versus the issue of people flooding in over the last 4 years, it's completely disproportional, right? And that's contributes to the whole Trump derangement syndrome, right? Because Trump, for all of his, you know, they say that he has no actual political talent, but his ability is to manipulate the media, right? They can't stop talking about him. Basically, he is like the catnip for them. And so coming back to the big, beautiful bill, it almost seems like there's no energy to oppose it because they kind of blew their wad, so to speak, on like Abrego Garcia. Okay, now look at these JD Vance memes. Okay, now let's talk about this Zohran Mamdani guy, right? Like they cannot focus their attention, right? And so what ends up happening is, like, you know, they have the flood the zone strategy with the executive orders, but then they also have it with attention, right? And so by the time, you know, the liberals want to say, no, this one's really important. The big, beautiful bill is trillions in debt, you know, it's going to create all these problems, but it's like, you've exhausted it. Like you've cried wolf over and over and over again for the last, you know, 12 years. So obviously no one is going to pay attention, but no matter how much he keeps doing that, he keeps like pressing that lever and making them talk about the things that he wants them to talk about, they always fall for it. It actually blows my mind. It keeps working.
This is something that that I've been thinking about as well, and I think it's informed by. I feel like a lot of politics is, at least in today's age, is at least on the left, is informed by taste. So like, what do I mean by that? Man, I don't want to get into Rousseau, but a lot of the politics surrounding Trump is not really based on anything other than people don't like him. We don't like him, right? Yeah, like he's gauche. He's a brute. It's not
vulgar.
You know,
yep.
Right. Because when you look at Trump on a policy level, he's not that different from a lot of conservative presidents of the past, right? There's nothing unique to Trump that makes him indistinguishable from other conservative presidents. If you removed his name, you know, off of it, and yet we kind of obsess over him. And I think that's what happens when politics collapses into just a matter of taste and sensibility, especially like a moral taste. Does that make sense? Am I just rambling here?
No, that's the right thing. Go ahead, David. Was that David?
Well, no, I think that's absolutely it. Yeah, I think that you know, with him, there is an unpredictability feature which does freak people out. Anu kind of referenced it. It's like, well, there is always that, you know, possibility of a financial collapse, or it could be, you know, a generation of prosperity. I was just talking to a friend of mine about this with what's happening in the Middle East, and it's like, well, you got door number one is world peace, and door number two is World War III. And you just never know which door you're going to walk through with Trump. But I notice it more and more and more, especially as I go on social media and especially as I interact with my liberal friends on social media. And if you guys start doing this, I guarantee you're going to see what I see, that just probably 95 out of 100 cases where somebody is railing against Trump, it's not for any substantive thing. It is for, can you believe that he broke this rule? Can you believe that he did this incorrectly, that he had this lack of decorum, that he said this grossly offensive thing? And no, I think you're absolutely right, Pass. I think that there are any number of material policy beefs that you could have with Donald Trump and with his administration. But that's not what most of this is. Most of this is they hate the guy. And I would
among women.
Right.
Morality,
Sorry, say that
though.
again?
Morality. Sorry, no. Sorry to show. Like I had to jump in. The
No, hit
morality,
it.
though, the moral capital among women in general, socially speaking, is incredibly important. It doesn't actually matter what you did. What matters is how, the morality that your action is imbued with, and whether you are seen to have moral capital. And like your decorum is a huge part of that. So the way they react to Trump is like how women are reacting to social rule breaking, right? It's the lack of respect for process. It's the rudeness, it's the racism, or like the verbal racism, and they don't even really necessarily know to in detail. I guess no, they do. They do. His acts regarding women are very well known. But
Yeah,
no one
sure.
really focused on that before he was seen as this like offense to morally good people and, college educated, liberal leaning leftist, even liberal leaning or actually leftist. It is more important how you say the thing than what you're saying. And even if you deliver the fact that is uncomfortable or otherwise offensive, right? Like the mere delivery of the fact is the offense, even if you do it in an
Yeah,
even keel way, right? Like people
and
read
it's
a
going
lot
to
of
eclipse.
aggression.
It's going
Yeah.
to eclipse any kind of outcome, right? Is just how you did it versus what was actually done.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you at the end there, but I wanted to tell this
No,
story like
no.
20 minutes ago. So this guy is going to be listening to this when it airs, so he'll get a kick out of hearing him referenced. But when you were talking about Occupy, I was just spent the weekend with a really good buddy of mine, a guy I went to high school with, and he was a dedicated lefty activist for a very long time. And he was very involved in the Occupy movement. And he told me the story that I hadn't heard, which was that at their meetings, it was very much like everybody gets to speak on everything and anyone can veto anything. And it was just this really unruly kind of, we're going to make sure obsessively that no one's opinion is discounted ever. And there was this guy who kept coming to their meetings who was just a complete dick. And he was rude to everybody and he would veto everything. And you could almost kind of imagine that, like, he was a plant or something, right, by the opposition, if Occupy had been threatening enough that anyone wanted to do that. But so this guy was so boorish and offensive that they weren't able to get anything done. And so my friend spoke up about it, and he took the microphone and he said, we've really got to do something about this because this one guy is basically killing progress for this entire group. And he felt good about having stepped up and been the one to do that. And he got home and got a kind of finger wagging message saying, some of the women in the group didn't appreciate that you were the one to do that. He just sort of went, okay, what the fuck?
That's great.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share that because
No,
it's sort
thank
of
you.
a perfect example of what you were talking
It is.
about.
And we're kind of seeing that at scale, right? Because I think the one thing that we saw, especially from 2016, maybe all the way up to like 2022, when we were kind of at like peak woke, is that, the thing is, like, as you were saying, Anu, like people want, or especially women, they want like certain types of decorum. And so what they do is, like, they don't necessarily apply the same standards to themselves. Like I saw all the time, people making fun
100%.
of Trump because he's fat. You know, people make fun of Rogan because
Yeah.
he's short, right? This guy because he's bald. You know, that guy's got a small dick, right? So then, you know, people see that and they go, oh, well, okay, so we're supposed to have all these body positivity standards, right? Like a lot of guys feel like now, especially with like social rules around, especially between the sexes, it's almost like you have to navigate a landmine of like what is polite, what's not polite. I got to say things this way. I got to be careful of that. Meanwhile, like I kept seeing think piece after think piece, you know, with just, I can only describe it as like sloppy language, very generalizing, very, kind of putting all men, especially young men, under the bus, right? And in the back of my head, and David, this is kind of how I got introduced with your work, where, you know, you were saying like, look, this is not good. Like you cannot use this sort of rhetoric and have a low level disdain for men and expect them to come and vote for you, right? And that's kind of what we saw, right? Everyone thought it was going to be referendum on women's rights. When the election came around, turns out, you know, it was, men had more of an impact in who they voted for, and more specifically who they didn't vote for. They just didn't show up on the left.
Yep.
And so like on some weird meta level, like Trump is kind of like this guy who picks at people's weak spots, and then in some weird way over the course of the discourse, he shows these kind of huge hypocrisies between the left and the right. And again, it's not to kind of run for the right, like right definitely has its own multitude of issues, but you know, you can't just use this sloppy rhetoric and just say, you know, you can't just keep spamming man or bear memes and say like, you know, male tears, male trash, and then just be like, I saw an article the other day. It's like, men, where have you gone? It's like,
oh my God.
That got shared a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that? Can we pause on the where have you gone? Actually, just raw thoughts, please.
I just read it like right before this. I literally am writing an article about it because I don't know if you've read it end to end, but it's so infuriating. So basically some initial thoughts is that it reminds me of a podcast that I actually wrote a separate article about. I wrote an article called Toxic Masculinity is Here to Stay.
Yes.
In that article, one of the things that I found infuriating is that it was about a podcast, and one of the people on the podcast was the like very high up in Hinge. I'm not sure if she was the director or like the CEO, but you know, she created was definitely influential at Hinge. And then she's talking about how, you know, she created much of the problems, or, you know, these dating apps created much of the problems. And so when it comes to the problem space, it's very much like, here are all the systemic things working against men, right? Lower labor force participation, you know, all the messaging is just kind of saying like, hey, men, you need to sit on the sidelines while the women take over now. But then when it comes to the solution space, it's like, oh, now we got to be a libertarian, go make some money, you know, be attractive. Like all of a sudden you need to do something, right?
Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah,
exactly. So basically the punchline there was like, oh, feminism for me, libertarianism for thee, right? And this article was kind of, it gave me very much the same flavor because, you know, she was talking about, I have a few passages here where she was talking about how, you know, she herself worked for Playboy, right? And it was like, she learned how to, you know, create a simulation of connection through, presumably the articles and the images that get printed at the magazine, right? So she gave them access to stimulation, as she said, right? It's quick, it's fast, it's clean, and it's frictionless. So she herself participated in that. But she doesn't want to necessarily look inwards and see how this sort of like landscape created a situation where now men are dropping out, right? Because when you have much harsher penalties for approaching in real life, where you feel like, you know, at any given moment, you like, I'm not saying that, you know, getting Me Too'd is very common, but it definitely feels like there's a more anxious, pervasive energy. Meanwhile, like she herself created this frictionless system in like an online landscape, right? So it's the game theory is just, you know, if you get much more penalty in one direction and much more reward in the other direction, of course people are going to start shifting their strategy, so to speak, right? And so just the final thought here is that she never explores that angle, right? It's always like, oh, you know, this is how I'm being impacted by it, right? And it's like, okay, there's no self-awareness there. Like, do you not see how you yourself created that very environment, right? Like, 'cause if I was a young woman, like in my 20s and 30s, I would look at people like her and go, okay, so you got to have the romantic, dates and all that stuff when you were growing up, but then you took that away from the next generation, right? And so there was a passage here that I highlighted, and she said on a exchange with one of her, I guess, I don't know, potential boyfriends or whatever, she said, I didn't chase, I invited, leaving the door open. If he ever wanted to cross the threshold, not just to take, but to meet, I was willing. And it's like, okay, like, so that's your, it's such a hypocrisy, because it's like, okay, so when it comes to deconstructing, you want to be a liberal in the sense that you want to be a 54-year-old woman with kids who's still on the dating scene and presumably hooking up every so often, but you still want the man to be traditional, right? So it's like, okay, traditionalism for you, liberalism for, right? And so that's the part where, I find the lack of self-awareness there to be just amazing to see, and especially because it's couched in a sort of compassion. It's written in very compassionate language, and it's like, oh, men, I know you've been fucking up, but I'm here when you are ready to get your shit together. It's like, oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that level of self-awareness. So, anyways, I'm putting an article on the right. Yeah.
No, this is why I think this conversation around taste is like, this is why I've been like thinking about taste a lot recently. I know people hate Rousseau or whatever, and there are some things that he says that are not great, right? He has ideas about women and thinks they can't reason, and I don't like that part. But his ideas on taste and me kind of seeing politics becoming a matter of taste, I do think that there's something there. I think that this is just me going back to what you were saying, David, and I kind of just wanted to close with this idea. There's a moment where Trump, in his State of the Union, says, I could cure cancer, and these people would still hate me.
Oh yeah.
And and I thought that was a really interesting moment, and it's kind of it's stuck with me ever since then. And I think because of sort of all of these ideas that we're talking about, Rohan mentioned this woman who's giving this this viewpoint of hers that's not really informed by any sort of that's just not aware of her own contribution to the problem, right? It's just not robust on ideas wise. I think all of this is why you just can't have any sort of robust leftist kind of media ecosystem, because ideas just aren't contested at all. One of the reasons why I think abundance is so popular is because there aren't conversations like this happening at all on the left. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you
it's kind of new ideas are either kind of accepted uncritically, or they're cast out before they can contaminate. But they're never played with, and they're never interrogated. And so, I mean, that's kind of how I understood what you were saying.
Yeah. Rohan, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah. I mean, to your point about the State of the Union, that was another perfect example where, because do you remember there was like some kid with like brain cancer? You remember him? And, like and none of the Democratic people even clapped or cheered for like the kid. Like they were all just sitting there like with their arms crossed.
It was nuts.
and so again, it's just another example where they try to hold this morality position, right? And I think this is the problem where Republicans, for all that they get wrong, they don't provide the optics of being like having this moral high ground. There's no thing where it's like, oh, I am fundamentally better than you. Whereas I feel like on the left, that's very much the case, where they try to say like, not only are we the high IQ people, we're the people who we do the good things morally, we do the good things in terms of policy, like we're better politicians, we are the smarter people, we are comprised of like the more cooperative group. And in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking, I'm like, look, if you have all of these advantages over your opponents, why are you getting your ass kicked?
Yeah, why are you still losing? Yeah.
And yeah, like, so I mean, again, it's just another example of just the hypocrisy. But I wanted to ask you guys, right? Because if Kamala Harris won, do you think that the left would even entertain this discussion of the abundance agenda?
No.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
Definitely not. They wouldn't think that there's anything wrong because it would be a vindication of their worldview.
Yeah. And I think this is the problem, right? Because I think this is the meta point. A lot of people, like, I know that, you know, people on the left, especially, they look at the electorate as just fundamentally stupid, right? Like, we, you know, if people were politically active, then they would vote left. But because they just watch, you know, Fox News, then, you know, they vote for Trump. And so they're dumbasses. We are the high IQ people. And that's why we can't get in, blah, blah, blah. But I think on some meta level, people are looking at the way these elections are going, and they're getting tired of voting for the lesser evil, right? Like, everyone is just positioning themselves as, oh, you know, yeah, we're not great, but we're not the other guy, right? And so what ends up happening is when you're the lesser evil for enough time, you become the greater evil, right? And so you see this like ratcheting up, right? And so I think on some meta level, people just want, you know, chaos, right? They just want something where someone comes in and they, you know, delete the entire code base, so to speak, right? Like, they wanted Doge to come in and just, you know, fuck shit up, right? They wanted them to whatever, like, get fire people, run some executive orders, right? Because it's like, if you're a regular person, I think for them, they're just checked out of both parties, right? They look at, you know, guys like Biden, Trump, everybody, and they go like, well, nothing's made my life better. It's not made my life better. I haven't seen any sort of progress on my side. So I'm just going to vote for something that seems like it might be like different enough so that I see it in my own life, right? And that is the different, that is like the whole crux of the abundance movement. It's connecting policy to implementation, right? Because a lot of these guys are lawyers. A lot of them are, like, I just call them professional documenters, right? They have thoughts and then they document their thoughts, right? They have blogs, newsletters,
True.
right? So it's just their whole shtick is to just have ideas and then put ideas out there. And then in terms of implementation, well, that's just, you know, for the masses, that's for the plebeians, right? We don't have to worry about that, right? So, and so it's just the entire abundance agenda is just, hey, we need to connect those two things, right? Like, it's not enough to have some policy on transportation. We need to make sure that, you know, Ricardo, who lives on this street, actually now has a new train line that benefits his life, right? So marrying, you know, these abstract ideas to the concrete things that people see.
I think we would have seen. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to say real quick, David. I forget stuff real quick. Otherwise, I would have just let you go. I apologize. Horrific ADHD. Sorry, guys. But I think that's why, Rohan. I think this is reflected even further in the campaigns themselves. So you brought up Kamala Harris, right? If you go back and look at Kamala's actual policy positions, I don't think you're going to find a lot. I mean, I didn't find a lot. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't find anything too substantive.
There wasn't a lot.
Yeah, and I think that is all a product of this culture that we're talking about, where ideas aren't really contested, right? So I think this creates the perfect backdrop for someone like Mamdani to enter. I mean, right now, yeah, I know. I know. I know.
It's like Red Beach. It's like Red Beach.
And I think the reason why, you know, the Mamdani is driving them crazy. You know, I was listening to a report this morning. I'm a big fan of a journalist named Ryan Grimm. And Ryan Grimm mentioned that the political establishment is sort of reeling right now, because this is the first time when economic reform has been paved or has been paired with, you know, a populist agenda, and they're surprised to see it succeed. And to me, that's just so funny. That's so funny to me, because that's so obvious. And the fact that you don't have an ecosystem where that idea would just be like duh to someone is just incredible to me. So just wanted to say that.
That since
So,
you dropped the Zohran bomb.
oh, you're okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were
Yeah, no,
waiting.
you got to weigh in
Opening,
because I
yeah.
know you was coming to
Okay,
answer it.
okay. Harris and Zoran are two sides of the same sort of identity-based morality coin. It's funny, right? So Mamdani is supposed to be an anti-establishment type, and Harris is supposed to have sort of represented the establishment or some kind of imagined centrist path by the time she reached her, the general election. But they both their qualifications for office are resting on the symbolic moral weight of their identities.
Exactly.
And right, and they just happen to both have a Hindu half, which I think is like very funny, even though they're supposed to represent opposite sides of the establishment. Like the left has fallen prey. Actually, no, I'm sorry. It's the establishment perhaps that leaned all the way into the leftist sort of moral hierarchy, right, wherein black people are at the top, followed by Latinos, followed by Asians of all varieties, followed by white people, but like really Asians are probably even below. Like in practice, Asians are at the bottom of just any hierarchy, which I also think is very funny, especially if you have any sort of religious identity other than Muslim, which I think is also interesting. And Mamdani actually does have some legislative accomplishments. I was looking it up today as assemblyman. He did some work on transportation specifically. And I forget, I can't recall the details of the legislation, but that gets buried because he leads with his identity, which is incredibly frustrating. Like he is a privileged, as Rohan, I believe, called him, a champagne socialist, which I think is an apt term, and it needs to be brought back. He has a professor. He's the Semper Professor. He's the son of the director Mira Nair, who happens to be of Punjabi Hindu descent, and his father happens to be of Gujarati Muslim descent via Uganda, because his father was born in Uganda. So he's this like kind of transnational kid. Like he's not, I guess.
His middle name's
Yeah,
Kwame. Like there you
yeah,
go.
Kwame. Yes, that's exact. They named him that for, I can't remember specifically. I think it had to do with anti-colonial signaling, right? They're very much a post-colonial couple that raised a post-colonial champagne socialist. And so he's like barely qualified to be running for the position he's running for. Now, Cuomo is technically more qualified. I'm not pro Cuomo, but I also like the whole thing is idiotic, and it represents the sort of like the Republican Party has gone through the same thing where you have the idiot poll, and then you have the serious like conservative poll that can't like do anything about the idiot poll. The same thing here, right, where the establishment should be able to impose some level of seriousness, but it has itself ceased to be serious, and it takes its cues from the left. And what's funny is that during the Bernie Sanders period is I never thought they would ever take their cues from the left, and now suddenly they are, and now I don't like what it looks like.
I think one profound difference, just before we move on, between Kamala Harris and Zohran Mamdani is that you're right, Anu, that for most kind of kitchen table lefties, all they're really seeing is, ooh, exciting identity and ooh, exciting identity. And so in that regard, they are kind of two sides of the same coin. And you're absolutely spot on about neither really having the qualifications for the office they were seeking. What I think is different is that Mamdani, well, at least through the primary, we'll see what he does in the general, if there's going to be a substantive general, seems to have embraced these kind of hardcore DSA, lefty economic positions that Kamala didn't touch once she became the nominee, and once we were in the general. So I think the reason that just everyone, left, right, and especially center, is flipping out about Mamdani and weren't flipping out about Kamala. I mean, obviously the right didn't like her, the left kind of did. Yeah, it was a pretty boring dynamic there, but like, man, Mamdani winning just set off a complete media bombshell. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason for that is that I think what scares them is the economic populism part. They really, really, really don't want
No.
those ideas being electorally tested. And they don't want to find out that they're popular because then everyone's going to have to do something differently. I don't have particularly high hopes
Fair.
for Mamdani being a good mayor. I think New York is a big, unruly, complicated city, and I don't think he knows enough to run it competently. But I kind of like what he's talking about, and I liked that he won, given all of the things he talked about. If you were to excise the kind of identity weirdness and the,
Yeah.
liberation theory stuff, but yeah.
It's funny, David, that you say that because I've been the past couple of days watching a key figures in politics on Substack just losing their minds, so much so that I've kind of developed this reactionary instinct where, if I see the media or a bunch of I guess famous figures piling on somebody, I kind of have this impulse to defend them. I don't know if that's just that's just the high school contrarian in me, or not. But speaking to your guys' points, I don't think so. So one, I'll say I don't know if Harris or Mamdani lean too much explicitly on their identity, but I do know that they definitely lean on it implicitly, right? Whether Mamdani
Yeah,
or
that's true.
Harris, whether or not they brought them up, it was still a subject of discussion, and they knew that, right? So they could effectively play both sides. In that one, they could say, "Oh well, I don't, I'm not interested in identity. People know that I'm a woman," whilst also having that identity be subject to discussion, right? So they are
Bingo.
definitely. I do think they're playing on that dynamic, but also I think. For me, this is just watching people reap what they sow. If you don't have a robust ecosystem of ideas, if you don't hold actual primaries, because that's another thing people don't talk about. The New York mayor election had a primary. This is what you get. You get what alluded to. You get the leftist version of the Tea Party movement. I think that's what happened. So
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the main difference I see, and to be honest, I really don't know anything about Zohran Mamdani, but the main difference I see is that with Kamala, when she ran, um, she was the incumbent, right? Or at least she was going to be viewed as the incumbent, right? So she was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place where she couldn't give any definitive policy positions, because if they were too different than what Biden was doing, the natural question would arise as to, why weren't they always doing that? Because it would seem like an implicit indictment on the last 4 years. Whereas if she kind of stuck with, oh, I'm just going to do something that's the same, people didn't want to hear that as well, right? So I think, given how little time she had, she was kind of just stuck, having to give non-answers, and not being able to kind of provide anything clear in terms of where she stood on things, right? And I think, like you guys said, she kind of relied on her identity to do the speaking for her, right? And this is something where I think a lot of people on the left don't necessarily appreciate, where she was saying like, they're saying, oh, she's, running quite centrist, or, she's given quite centrist policy positions and she's not leaning into identity politics. But the thing is, you don't have to, right? Like, because she
No,
leaned
your
into it for the
fans are going to
previous
do that
years.
for you.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing
Yeah.
is, she did it herself, right? Like in leading up to 2020 and all that, right? She had all of that rhetoric, and then, if you spend the first 20 out of the 24 hours, leaning into identity politics, and then you lay off for the last 4 hours, you don't get to say, okay, it's a complete 180, right? It's just kind of, you've had all of this momentum before, and just because you're silent on the matter is not the same as sort of repudiating your past positions.
I think she was also hindered. I mean, I don't know that had she not been part of the Biden administration, we would have seen some kind of robust policy slate. I don't really think she comes from the wing of the Democratic Party that's particularly interested in building a robust policy slate. And we run into this problem a lot. We kind of discussed briefly the big beautiful bill earlier, but one of the reasons Democrats are having such a hard time fighting this is because their position is, well, we hate what the Republicans are about to do to Medicaid. Okay, all right. So what do you want to do with Medicaid? Well, not that. Just not that. That's bad. So you want to expand it? Not really. I mean, I don't care. It's fine. And for a lot of people, well, these systems aren't fine. They don't work particularly well. They're very hard to access. There is a lot of red tape that you have to go through to actually access these public benefits. And this is now 3 election cycles in a row where the true north of the Democratic Party has been, we're not Donald Trump. And I think, legitimately, I think we have forgotten how to fight for things, or even what we actually want to be fighting for, other than we don't want to be rude and dumb sounding like Trump is. But so really, on the big beautiful bill stuff, where are the Democrats' better ideas for this, other than just don't pass it? Like, Republicans absolutely deserved that line of criticism when we were having the fight over the Affordable Care Act. It's like, okay, you don't like this? What's your idea? Well, they didn't have one. And now we're in that position because we've just spent the last 10 years being mesmerized by this complete circus clown. And we can't think about it. We forgot how to think. We don't know. We don't even know what we want.
I was going to ask you guys a question, but I want Rohan to go first.
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of the people on the left, especially Democrats, like they're already looking to like 2026 and 2028. Like they're just blocking out everything that's happening right now, because to them it's like something where it's so unpleasant that they don't want to deal with it right now. It's something where like they're just trying to mentally, just look forward and trying to see, okay, what are the things that we can do when actual elections come, to see how we can change, right? But in the meantime, you're just going to have these issues where it legitimately feels like, I don't know about you guys, but like it's like, okay, now we're in a war with Iran. Actually, no, we're not. Okay, now Israel hates Iran, and actually, no, it's fine. And actually, now it always seems like we're always one step away from nuclear war, but then he rolls it back, and then he rolls some tariff, and then he crashes the economy. But actually, that's okay because he rolls that back. So it's just so chaotic that people on the left have just mentally checked out, and quite frankly, like most people have mentally checked out, right? Because it's too much to handle, right? Like, I don't know about you guys, but I can't even make sense of a lot of these headlines where, I'll read stuff where it'll be like, Katy Perry goes to space. And I'm like, I don't know if that's real anymore. It's literally like, is that real? And then, you'll see all these headlines where like, they released an ASMR deportation video, and you're like, what is that? Like, you have to like check, you know what I'm saying? And it's just like the actual news has gotten so absurd that it's like, before it was depressing, now it's just confusing, right? So it's just mentally, as just a regular person, it's hard to keep up, and that's just looking at the headlines. So like, if you're some policymaker, you're dealing with these tariffs that are in like quantum superposition. They're enacted, not enacted. They're in this like quantum state. You don't know what to do with it, and it's just mentally your mind is kind of partitioned into like 100 different lines of sight, and you don't know which one to focus on. You just check out, right? That's I feel like that's kind of the prevailing thought for the majority of people, right? Aside from the policy wonks and the people who really like to cover this stuff, most people are just checked out.
Mm-hmm. Or bamboozled out. I mean, I don't know that checked out to me kind of implies that they've withdrawn intentionally. I think it's just kind of like, well, I don't know anything anymore. And yeah, I feel that frequently when I'm browsing news headlines. It's like, okay, I look at Trump's Middle East policy, and I'm like, well, if he's actually getting these guys to not bomb each other, that's good, right? But he's obviously crazy, and this is nuts. And we could have World War III starting tomorrow, but it hasn't started yet. So I don't know what to think. I don't know if I should root for this. I don't know if this is going to be one of those moments where I look back and go, oh my God, how could I not have weighed in on that moral calamity in the making? But I just don't know. And I actually do follow this stuff, and I don't know. So I don't know where that leaves, voters who would rather spend their time thinking about other things.
See, okay, we got fucked on foreign policy specifically because America does need to maintain a hegemonic position because of all of the countries that could maintain one. I just would objectively rather it be us. I mean, whatever, I guess call me a nationalist if you must. Uh,
Yeah, I
and,
kind
and
of agree with
so
that.
Right. I mean, what are our other choices? So I think it's like I feel like okay, I routinely feel more anger at Democrats than I feel at Trump doing any particular thing because I feel like this was preventable. This was their
Yeah,
elect like I mean I understand that Harris had not that much time, but what I'm saying is even the circumstance of her not having enough time was also preventable. There were a series of choices they
Right.
made leading up to that, right? Where you're like seeing this
God, yes.
train about to crash. And when Bernie won the Michigan primary in 2016, that should have been a wake up call to them that they were going to lose their quote unquote blue wall states. Like that should have been obvious in hindsight, right? And if you can't they keep expecting to coerce you morally using their supposed holding of the moral high ground as a uh, I mean, just for lack of a better term, trump card keeping you from voting for him. Uh, but you can't, why would you vote for someone who still just can't behave morally, but insists that they are with a smile on their face, like very politely in the language of like care, basically. They're fucking you over in the language of care. And that's honestly more infuriating than Trump just fucking me over openly. Like there's just
Right.
something more infuriating about that. I can't explain it. It's so visceral too for me.
I'm curious. First off, I think you're. I've talked about this before too. Basically, I rather if I'm gonna get fucked over, I prefer the person who's like, "Hey, I'm gonna fuck you over," rather than the person who says, "Hey, I'm gonna fuck you over," and
This is
it's
going
for
to be
your own
great for
good.
you.
Yeah, you're gonna like it. You're gonna like it. It's like okay, yeah. I'm curious, sort of building off that. I want to hear what the group thinks because I think there's a lot of interesting ideas and dynamics that we've discussed today at play in this thing. What are our thoughts on the David Hogg situation, or did you guys follow that at all?
I did follow it. Yeah. Um, and Baz, I loved your last piece about him. I had written very, very critically about David Hogg in the past, and then I kind of regretted that when I saw what happened to him at the hands of the party establishment. I, I thought that Hogg was like, I likened him to a Christmas present that you don't want, and I found it like I found his ascension to party vice chair evidence that Democrats still had absolutely no idea how they needed to be talking to men. And then during his brief tenure, Hogg actually did a pretty good job of talking to men, and that was too much, so he had to go. Um,
Too much. The groups are mad.
yeah,
So Hogg, right? Okay. So he went on Bill Maher right before the poor man got removed, and I was skeptical about him until I heard him speak, and he did actually have some more direct words than I expected him to have. He did still hew to a sort of Democrat HR party line because there are just certain things you can't say that are considered impolite. But he nevertheless, like, I guess, like, I had some hope that they did select him. On the other hand, though, he's like kind of not qualified. I- he's the spirit that we would want, but I don't know. Maybe it's also that I don't view 20 somethings as qualified for a lot of things. So that just may be my late 30 something, like middle-aged bias. I don't know. I was heartened, and then I read the reason he was removed and I thought, wow. So they're trying to achieve gender representation parity actually ended up fucking over women, which is interesting, right? Because that is what happens when there is a category, like when there's a male only category that just ends up like you can't fracture the female only category and then expect like women to do well. It's the same problem in female sports. No one's going to compete. If they make a third category of quote all genders, no one is going to compete in that category, like not enough to create a competition. So the same issue arises. And so they haven't learned that identity is the problem. And I know people think we're actually past peak woke. Sure, we might be past like institutional peak woke, but we're kind of not, because it's a psychological condition. It's not it is institutional policy, but okay, I happen to just know a lot of people in HR because I was once in HR, and it is all like gone to
I'm sorry
ground,
to
kind of
hear
like
that.
a heart. What?
I'm sorry to hear that you were once.
Yeah, it's a really big problem. I know. I should tell you the story sometime. And so it's gone underground. So kind of like Harvard and like affirmative action and like the way Ivy Leagues, like prestigious schools are going to practice affirmative action is now like even less official than it once was. The same thing it is with feminism and wokeness, because wokeness is really just feminism at the foundation, which I think a lot of people don't realize. So they don't criticize the mother ideology, as it were. And so that is still there. It's a psychological lens that you apply to all of your reality. So it has not passed.
It is not bad, and it's still going to be very potent in the silent spaces where it's not being particularly challenged. I don't. I'm guessing most of you guys don't follow what happens on Broadway, but there was just this flare up with Broadway diva Patti LuPone. Did anyone hear about this?
Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
do edify us, please.
Okay,
David,
so
I really like how you preface that, David. It's like, I don't know, three big Broadway
I'm
heads here.
guessing you guys didn't do degrees in
No
music
musical
theater like
theater
I did.
people.
Yeah. All right. So Patti LuPone is this mega diva, phenomenal performer, like absolute legend of the stage. And there, 500 people, industry professionals, signed a letter trying to get her barred from the Tony Awards, which were recent. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't know if they succeeded or not. Like I don't know if she went. Um, but the reason that they wanted this absolute legend of the medium barred from going to the industry awards ceremony was because she had called another Broadway star who is black a bitch in an interview. And so that caused 500 people to write a letter. But what was really, really funny was the
Wow.
reason Patti LuPone called this other person, whose name I cannot remember, a bitch. And it wasn't just that she was being catty or that she was sounding off. It was that what had happened was Patti LuPone and Mia Farrow were doing a show in a theater that shared a wall with another theater. And in that other theater, there was a musical with a predominantly black cast. And there was some kind of
I did hear this,
issue
yeah.
with the sound in the other theater the songs and the music could be heard during Patti LuPone and Mia Farrow's show. So she politely reached out to the theater management and said, "We can actually hear your music over here. Is there anything you can do about that?" The theater management fixed the problem. She sent them flowers, done and dusted, right? Well, no, because the star of this other show then took to Instagram to say that by asking this predominantly black cast of a musical to turn the noise down, basically, Patti LuPone had microaggressed against them.
Oh,
And in the process of doing this, she said
wow.
something like, hey, we're both Broadway vets. We should be more respectful to each other. And of course, so now Patti LuPone is getting dunked on. And it was in an interview in response to that where she said, "Hey, I've done like 36 shows. You've done 10. Don't call yourself a vet, bitch," was what she actually said. And then 500 people basically condemned Patti LuPone as a racist who is so problematic she needs to be barred from
Man.
these industry award ceremonies. So I think we are going to see these woke flare-ups. They might not be in agencies of the federal government as often, but they are certainly still going to happen. And they're probably
Oh,
going to
yeah.
happen in these smaller places that don't get the same level of media coverage.
It's a great point. In fact, it is something that happens in small groups. It reigns in small groups. In fact, Like, okay, take take a group I was kicked out of earlier this year, and I wonder if my friend who knows this story is on, and if she is, I hope she doesn't kill me. That was definitely a place, well, she and I are on fine terms, a place where vulnerability and like the most vulnerable woman set the rules of engagement, like the boundaries of acceptable conversation and topics and everything, right? Like socially speaking, I don't think you guys would know. I mean, because why would you know? This is the state of mind is policed and maintained among women in one-on-one relationships and in small groups. If it is, as long as it is socially enforced, because, well, it is, women have systems of social control just natively speaking, just because of, again, I don't want to biologically essentialize, but we do tend towards certain normative behaviors, even if like nature and nurture both play a role, but there are certain tendencies where if our nurturing couldn't, possibly transcend. So anyway, that is what rules that like level of fragility. And so if you transgress ever so slightly, that whatever that vulnerable person's boundaries are, like you are socially, like you're done. You were socially kicked out. The friendship has ended. You were kicked out of the group. Like that's the sort of thing that happens. Friendships between women especially end really easily. And it is rare that I have actually put things back together with a female friend. I read, of course, that men actually have an easier time repairing friendships. So this ideology, this ideological, like the set of quote ideas that are really a social control system are enforced in one-on-one relationships, and that's like the reason that's the reason things are not necessarily going to change. Not that I want to be negative.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I think gets underappreciated with male relationships, right? Because everyone's talking about male
Mm-hmm.
loneliness and the whole shtick with like Richard Reeves and this whole thing right now is like, which has some truth to it, is that we treat a lot of men, especially young men, as kind of like defective women. But to your point, it is true. Like I've seen two guys literally like fight each other, and then once the fight is over, you just shake hands and you're kind of like done. You can grab a beer. That's kind of an underappreciated aspect with these relationships. Obviously it's, there's other parts of it which are definitely tough, like when if you're a guy and stuff, like it is true that women generally tend to be more emotionally open with one another. But as you said, there are like you commented on my most recent post, right? Like there's some sort of imagined female solidarity where like you
Mm-hmm.
have to be on the same team and you have to fall in line. And it's something where I genuinely think that it's kind of sad because a lot of the supposed misogynistic rhetoric is really just a lot of guys just being more blunt, treating women the same way they treat men. Like it's just like
Yep.
guys talk to each other. It's not a very, emotional language. We kind of like tease each other. We kind of insult each other.
Yeah.
It's just built in, right? So I think a lot of times when women enter these spaces, they kind of see that sort of language and they're like, to your point, right? They're more neurotic, they're more sensitive. And as a result, they kind of mistake it as some sort of, misogynistic language or sort of discriminatory language, whereas in reality we're just kind of dumb. Like we just like to say fucked up shit for the sake of it, right? And I think it ties into like kind of a broader phenomenon that we're seeing right now, which is like a lot of guys are just dropping out of different parts of society, right? Speaking of that New York
Mm-hmm.
Times article, like
Oh
where
yeah.
you're not like higher education now, it's not I think it's like 60-40 female right now. I think those stats are misleading, but whatever, at an aggregate level it's true. But like in publishing right now, like what's interesting is that a lot of people on the platform, occasionally they'll message me and they'll be like, hey, can you check this out, here's a piece of fiction that I'm writing. And so I see personally
Yeah.
a lot of guys that have like a lot of talent, but then
Mm.
they get kind of boxed out of the existing apparatus, right? Because publishing
Yeah.
is a especially salient example of that, where 80% of the apparatus is white women, and
Yeah.
so they're just boxed out. They can't get anything through, And what's interesting is that, we're more than willing to acknowledge biases when you have something that's kind of artificially all male. Like that's what I think about economics and philosophy. Like it's just complete total like sausage fest. And so that's why you get kind of like a bunch of autistic people like kind of LARPing fan fiction about the world in both of those domains, right? Whereas
Shots fired.
That's really a good analogy.
Yeah. I mean, it is because again, like I'm writing follow. I had to paywall the post because of the thing that I wrote at the beginning of it, but I wrote about econ bloggers, right? And so I'm trying to write a more friendly follow up, and so it's something like that. I'll probably release that at some point. But to the broader point, like there's so many different areas where there were spaces where like guys would just hang out and all of a sudden they became co-ed, and as a result of sort of this neurotic differences between men and women, like more men are less neurotic, whereas women are more neurotic. Then what ends up happening is that the rules of engagement kind of change, right? The Overton window, so to speak, just kind of closes and closes and closes until it just becomes like you feel so ideologically squeezed, like you can't say what you want to say, you can't express the opinions that you actually hold. And so as a result, like they just kind of drop out. And I think this is why there's a level of schadenfreude with Trump, because he's just the complete antithesis of that. He breaks the Overton window wide open, right? And quite frankly, like I see it on the left as well. Like this is the thing that I feel like the left doesn't want to acknowledge, where it's like I see people who are left wing now calling each other retards or calling like their enemies low IQ. Right? You never would have heard that.
No, God.
Right?
Oh, never.
So it's like it's happening everywhere, and I think it's just a thing where I get it. Like you want to be compassionate, but there's only so much that you can squeeze rhetoric until you're just like, I just want to say what I want to say. It doesn't make me a bad person,
And I think
It's
all
impolite.
of that.
The truth is impolite. No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that the truth is impolite, and that's kind of it. And honestly, calling people like I'm glad retard is back. Like it really needed to be brought back for a really long time.
Oh,
My
really
partner
good.
has definitely also said retard on multiple occasions, and I have relished saying it in private. I'm just like kind of glad I can say it at least in writing. I don't, because it feels like that's an easy insult, right? We can think of more clever insults, surely, among ourselves.
It's not too
Sure.
clever for me. I will use it as liberally as I so please.
No, okay, so you're saying econ bloggers and like primarily male sort of whatever intellectual domains end up reflecting a certain extreme like personality trait that men tend to possess on combo on average taken to an extreme, right? That makes sense. The same thing happens in completely female dominated industries, is that like the most it tends toward ever increasing neuroticism and conscientiousness and the need to be liked, whereas I don't really know how the econ blogger community works socially speaking, but I imagine there's like an equal need to be liked, though they would never perhaps call it that. And that's why we need gender balanced groups. But at the same time, there are certain single sex spaces that should, I think, be preserved. Like I have become a proponent of fraternities, as strange as it sounds. Like my partner is in the Freemasons.
Hell yeah.
And that has been very good for him. I'm very glad that he has like a community of men to turn to. Female only spaces are also necessary, but I actually think that the more women segregate ourselves from men, professionally speaking, the worse off our careers. Because the reality of the matter is the majority of the power is still in the hands of men. And that is fine. Power is neutral. The person wielding it determines the moral valence of it, right? And so I don't think that men are inherently bad at wielding power. I don't think women are necessarily inherently bad at it, but like they both have certain average personality inclinations that would be bad with power, right? So certain people are just going to be particularly, you just don't want them to have power. But I still had to position myself proximally to men, professionally speaking, to get beyond a certain point, and that's just the ugly reality of it all.
I think one of those characteristics that you might not want wielding power is, I'm not going to try to politicize this too much, but is free speech. And I don't mean free speech in the constitutional sense. I mean more what Ro was talking about, just being able to freely say what is on your mind without worrying how many people are going to be upset by it. And I think that the more I think about this, the more I think that really is a phenomenally important gender difference that has impacted workspaces. Because what offends men and their sensibilities is very different than what offends women and their sensibilities. And there's, like, I agree with Anu that we do need gender balanced workspaces, but then they don't just need to be balanced aesthetically, having the same number of men working there and the same number of women. They need to be, I can't think of the word I'm trying to say, but they need to be gender balanced in terms of their values as well. So generally speaking, if the corporate or HR value is you must not say this because this is deemed offensive. And if the guy in the cubicle next door says, well, hey, I don't think it's offensive, typically the reaction to that is, well, you're wrong. And these are the preferences. Somebody does find it offensive. So that's the direction we're leaning with this. And at scale, I think that is incredibly pernicious. And it becomes really easy to round up everything that could be considered offensive by basically anyone as deeply problematic and completely verboten for any professional workspace. And that that process took decades to complete, but it kind of has completed. And I think men are starting to wake up to the fact that, you know what, actually, all of these things that I'm not allowed to say at work, I don't have any problem with people saying them. And there's no equivalent set of things that I would have any problem with people saying. So why am I having to live by these rules? Because they really do govern our lives in a significant way.
I think it's that. I also think that because it seems like offense is one way. I think there are things that offend men, but those things are they're not penalized in the same way, right? That other things are.
Sure.
So I don't think I don't think men are just in this sort of Buddhahood where nothing offends them, and I don't think you're suggesting that. I'm just making this clear. But like they're still affected, right, by certain things. It's the imbalance of those things that bothers them. One thing I wanted to ask real quick, David, because you mentioned that Broadway story earlier. This was a black cast. Was the person who made a big fuss for Patti LuPone? Was it a straight black male? I know it's a very specific question. It's a weird one. Okay, no, yeah.
No, it was.
So that's
I don't know. Yeah, no. I think that was your point. No.
Yeah, the reason why I bring this up is I've had good friends of mine sort of bring this out, and I see it everywhere now, where a lot of the times these sort of racial angles that are being played upon, they're rarely. I mean, it still happens, but I don't see straight black men doing this as much. And this isn't to say they don't capitalize on the the I guess the benefits of racial discourse or anything like that, but more so that I just this is a Broadway show. No, they're not part of it, right? And I see that a lot. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to say is, yes, to Anu's point, the majority of power is still in men's hands, although it's a very select few men, right? Which people tend to confuse. Not that you confused it, just people in general. And then the last thing I want to say is, I think what we're getting at is the privileges that come with manhood have been sort of appropriately addressed within the context of institution, right? We can definitively say, hey, this is an excess of manhood, right? Overt violence is the go-to example, right? Like we all know that it's inappropriate for you to put your hands on someone just because you disagree with them, even though it feels really, really good, right? You still shouldn't do it. But we haven't necessarily identified the excesses of womanhood, right? We haven't identified, we haven't said, hey, these are the privileges that are, intrinsic to womanhood, or these are the negotiating tactics which are intrinsic to womanhood, the equivalent to overt male violence. You have to leave those, when you enter a workspace or when you enter a marketplace of ideas, you have to put those aside as well.
Yep.
So I think until you have that happen, you'll continue to see these problems. And then one final thing I will say is, it's funny that you brought all this stuff up, Anu, because I'm dealing with this in my own personal life. I'm having issues with my cousin's girlfriend.
Oh yeah.
She's constantly trying to. I don't talk politics at all. Anyone who knows me knows politics is my whole thing. If you're like a friend of mine, but I never bring politics up in social spaces because I'm not an idiot, right? I follow Marine mess hall rules. No religion, no politics, no talking about women or men. Since we're egalitarian here, or whatever you prefer. Like I follow those rules because I want to have a nice dinner. I want to have a nice time, right? And when
You sound beaten down.
Well, because I am, because I have been.
I'm so sorry.
I just not to rant on this woman, but just the constant need to project politics upon people, to project her politics, and to suggest that she can only be right. It makes me think to myself, why am I liberal? I don't have to be liberal. Like that's how like annoying it is. That's how like just
I don't want to be on the team with this person.
I don't even want to play anymore. I'm gonna take my ball and go home. That's how frustrated I am.
That's what men have done, evidently.
So, yeah, and so this is just a micro case, a microcosm of a much larger structural problem. I think until you can address that without me, like I can't walk up to this woman and be like, "Shut the fuck, like enough, right?" Because
out of respect,
right, like out of
you making like very like elaborate hand gestures as you say that. Like Ryan Gosling from Drive, like when he like has his hands out in front of him, it's like, hey, enough.
Enough. I don't get to do that. I don't get to Gosling her, and it's not. And it's not because I don't want to. It's not even for her, to be honest with you. It's mostly out of respect of my cousin because he's a good man, right? I can't breach this social contract, and she knows that, right? And so until that stops happening on a micro interpersonal level, I just don't see things improving.
No, it's an interpersonal problem, right? Like the men won't come back until the women they know in their lives and interact with casually, I suppose, like, weak ties, whatever, just socially speaking, until the vibe isn't hostile anymore. Men aren't coming back, and that's the thing. That's what they don't understand, that this is a micro problem that's psychological, not like political. The politics follows from the psychology.
Interesting. I've never thought of it that way, but I think that sounds very right to me. Because I think I always kind of considered it in the reverse. This was some sweeping, overarching political ethos that trickled down and infected your personal relationship. I'd never considered the reverse of that.
There are feedback loops. So, like, it's true, but the idea is disseminated not from the top. They disseminated from the academy, right? They disseminated still socially, because at the end of the day, this academy serves as a social rubber stamp, right? Right? Like it marks you as a legitimate person for a certain labor pool. So that, like, and the academy, of course, majority of college students, not perhaps an overwhelming majority, are women. The social sciences, which I was in, heavily populated, mostly women. Gender studies, obviously, like just almost 98% women, I would say. And everything other than really the hard sciences has a massive gender skew. And then the ideas that have kind of disseminated from the academy come from those specific departments that tend to skew female. Now, it's not that those areas are necessarily feminized, it's that as women have replaced the retiring male professors, like, and as the generation has risen up that's been steeped in postmodernism, post-colonial theory, all these things, that's what's then disseminated into wider society as more and more women go to college and elites are overproduced. So that's where it comes from. It's like both.
Okay,
So
right.
two things, just Baz. One back to your previous point about the straight black guys. It reminded me of one of my favorite articles on the internet. And if you ever have time, you should search it up. For all those in like who are listening, please go to it's The Root, and the title of the article is called "Straight Black Men Are the White People of Black People." It is
Oh my
glorious.
God.
It is
You
Hilarious.
Oh my
fucking made
God.
that up.
favorite.
That is not real.
No, it's
Tell me that's
100%.
fucking not real.
It is 100% real. It's pure. I'll post it in the chat. It's one of my favorite. I will sometimes stop what I'm doing and like just go back and read that article. Like just
I read this at the time. It was,
it's
yes, yes.
and to your point about like the gendered failure, because Baz, you asked the question like, we've kind of seen a stereotypically masculine failure mode where, we get all aggressive, go to war, start killing each other. So we haven't really seen that feminine side kind of fail at scale. And it kind of reminds me of like, do you know what the difference between like acts of commission versus acts of omission are? Does that terminology make sense?
Yes.
It's unfamiliar to me.
Okay. So basically, if you tell a lie, you overtly tell a lie, then that is an act of commission. So you've done
Yeah.
a bad thing and you've deliberately taken an act. Now, if someone is deceived and you don't correct them, that is an act of omission. So you omit to tell them specific details that could have undeceived them, right? So it's a thing in moral philosophy, right? Because these things are generally treated differently, where deliberately doing harm on someone is treated worse as failing to stop doing harm on someone else. So there's kind of a dichotomy there between acts of commission and omission. To your point, Baz, like I think this kind of maps onto the gendered issue because stereotypically stereotypically masculine like failure modes are kind of like it's like Doge, right? You just kind of it's the equivalent of just punching the wall. You get upset, you get angry, you punch the wall. If someone sees you do that, they can see, okay, he's overly emotional. Like we need to go for a timeout or whatever. Like we can't talk to this guy. He's like clearly out of his mind. Whereas the feminine failure mode feels more like an act of omission, where it's like,
Yes.
if the masculine is kind of like Doge and kind of burn everything down, fire a whole bunch of people, the act of omission, there's kind of a broken bureaucracy where it's like, all right, who's at fault here? It's like one person's pointing to another person, the other person's pointing to someone else, right? So it's like you can't really point to a specific person because it's just a systemic broken thing, right? So
Distributed system of
yeah,
failure.
exactly. And so when you deal with someone, like if you have an argument with someone and they get so upset they punch a wall, it's almost like they're acknowledging, okay, they are not in a state of mind to have this conversation right now. But the stereotypically female thing is like if you're having a heated conversation, they'll break down and cry, right? And so that gets treated differently, right? And so it's in a weird way, it's
True.
the female version of punching a wall, where it's like, okay,
Yes.
you're not in a position of being able to handle this, but it's obviously treated differently. So I don't know if I mapped it correctly, like active commission versus omission versus masculine, feminine versus punching a wall versus breaking down, crying. They all have the same vibe to me. And I feel like that's kind of, to answer your question, the male versus female failure mode.
The binaries map onto each other, I believe is what you're saying. That tracks. I'm not sure about I mean, failure modes, I agree. If as having been a crier myself, I don't really anymore, but I definitely, especially in interpersonal situations, tended to cry, and in relationships also. A male friend of mine called it the sort like lady tears, as he calls them, are they're like a weapon. They can be weaponized. And I may not be intending to weaponize tears, but I can see how it is a sort of weapon without without any sort of shield that you can employ against it, because it is like punching a wall. There's really nothing around it. Like male overt violence perhaps is the only analog, because that's something that women can't defend against necessarily either. So but it's seen as somehow less powerful, like, right, when a woman cries compared to a man punching a wall, because you're right, actually, yeah, it is mapping onto the acts of commission versus omission thing. Because I can point to the man punching the wall in an argument as he has lost his composure and therefore perhaps respect him less for it, and actually just also be scared, right? Like, I would be scared. Versus if I were to cry, that's really being coercive in a certain way, even if I'm not intending it to be coercive. Like, they are a weapon.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah,
sucks.
and
It sucks.
absolutely. I mean, depending on the circumstances there, and depending on the reason you're crying and who you're doing it in front of, it wouldn't be you. I don't know that it would be physically frightening, but it could absolutely be frightening in terms of the consequences. Um, and you
I'm
know,
frightened. Sorry, go ahead. Finish
no,
your
no,
point,
that was
David.
really the end of my point.
No, I mean, I'll be honest. When I see white women cry, I cross the street. Right? Like, I don't, like, genuinely, like, I don't want to be involved. I don't, because I know it's not going to end well for me, and it's also, to so yes, Rohan, to to your entire point, yes, that is, and there are evolutionary reasons why, right, one form of violence is indirect versus another, right? If it makes sense intuitively why, if you are a creature that can't overpower, right, it's the opposite, side of your species, then of course you're not going to use overt means of violence to
Yes.
accomplish, what you want. And it's also, again, sort of speaking personally, and this is going to sound messed up, but I'm kind of unmoved at this point when I see a woman cry, because I kind of need a beat to check whether this sounds awful, but whether this is worthy or not of tears, right? And I think we're just not used to understanding that these are the same things, these are the same sort of power plays, just just on the opposite sides of the spectrum.
They're okay. The weapons women can use are tears and sexuality. Those are the two that have no analog. And men have equivalent weapons, right? I mean, I guess literal weapons in your case, where ours seem a little less dangerous. But for example, I find it to be gross when there is this sort of God, how do I describe it? A tendency among professional women, not certainly not all, maybe not even the majority, but there are definitely women out there who will use sexuality to get ahead in the workplace. I don't mean literally sleeping with someone. I just mean presentation, just general manner of existing. And I'm going to sound, I'm sure at least one person listening is thinking, wow, she sounds like a misogynist. So I'm just going to head that off at the pass, because it's just a thing. Some women do it. I have seen women on Substack write about doing it. It's not like they will dress a certain way. It's kind of like flirting professionally. Now, I understand too that there is a certain line that cannot be crossed where professional flirting can turn into actual flirting, and like towing the line is really something that should be done for both groups. I don't know. Am I on to something, that there is a
Yeah, I
range
mean,
of professional flirting?
that's something. Yeah, it leads into something that I just recently wrote about, which was kind of like the porn issue, right? Which is like you're taking it from the angle of like flirting in the career space, but I see this all the time where there's a lot of like softcore porn on Substack, on a whole bunch of other places,
Yeah.
on YouTube, and so what you're describing is kind of another. I don't want to call it a weapon, but it's kind of this plausible deniability, right? So I think
Hmm.
guys, by virtue of being like maybe little bit more socially inept. Like we can't use plausible deniability because we're just more direct in the way that we speak, in the way that we act. So there's no like dual strategy there, where I think it's a lot like what you're kind of describing is like, hey, I'm just being friendly. I'm just trying to make some career moves and stuff, right? Where it's the same thing with a lot of the content that's in video form or pictures and stuff, where it's like it's provocative, it's borderline sexual, it's kind of like right on that line. But if anyone tries to call it out, it's just on the other side of the line where they can go, well, no, I'm just filming a workout video or
yeah,
or whatever.
That
right?
shit bothers me. That shit really bothers me. I don't like oh God, what is that? It's a double standard, I suppose. That's really all you could call it, right? It's okay. So it's this like fucked up relationship that women often have with the male gaze, which is that you are sort of evolutionarily conditioned to court it, but you are socially not supposed to court it, right? Feminism makes that not okay. And Instagram culture places it, or TikTok, whatever the fuck, sort of incentivizes us to do it. So there are really like lots of confused signals coming from multiple places regarding the courting of the gays. And so most women's relationship to it, I would venture, is probably dysregulated. Mine was once dysregulated, just, whatever. This is the sort of thing I speak honestly about. It took a lot of work to regulate it, and honestly, the everything in the culture made it that way, including feminism, which made it impossible to even address the problem in the first place. And that's why I go after feminism a lot, is that it even prevents us from naming the problem for sake of rudeness. Like it was the imagined solidarity that we were talking about, Rohan. Like the enforced solidarity.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like it's also just a double standard because I think a lot of the pornographic content kind of shows how like the empowerment slash degenerate scale is kind of different based on whether it applies to men or women. Like I've written this lane of article a couple of times, right? Where it's like, if guys, God forbid, they watch porn or, they go and subscribe to an OnlyFans account, that's just peak degeneracy, right? Like there's nothing worse than you could do. You're an incel, blah, 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 loser. But the people creating this content, it's for a certain wing of feminists, like this is empowering, right? This is something where, they almost promote it to an extent. And so
yeah, they do.
It's funny. If you go to my most recent article, like there's like maybe like 150 comments. And I would say like 80 of them are from like one person. It's just like, and occasionally I check my phone and I'm just like, man, please log off. But the point is that, they're trying to run defense for different types of feminism, right? And it's like, oh, you don't understand the diversity of thought. There's this type of feminism, that type.
Oh, no true Scotsman.
Yeah, but then exactly. So if there's so many different variations of feminism that it's completely internally contradictory, then it's like, what is there to criticize, right? Like, in the way I see it is like, okay, feminists should all get together in some huddle and kind of like hash out their own
work it out.
Yeah, work it out before you decide what to criticize people for. Because on the man side, it's like you basically get criticized in every direction, right? If you're overly conservative, you're saying you point out like, hey, there's legit. I was on a vacation a little while ago, and like there was a person walking around, and the shorts were so short that like you could literally just see her ass hanging out, right? And it's like, again, I'm not like a prude, but I'm saying like there's got to be something in between that and like a burqa, it's just like there's got to be something, in terms of level of like conservatism or whatever it is, right? So it bring it back to feminism. It's like I feel like there's no reconciled opinion, and they kind of use this quote unquote diversity of thought to kind of run defense for all of the contradictions. And so no matter what opinion you have, you always get criticized on the male side.
You can't pin it down. Okay, but to actually, I face this problem too, where feminists will come for me, and they will accuse me of misrepresenting feminism. Actually, you may also have written about this several months ago, I feel like. like I think we have just circled around the same topics just independently, which is interesting. And so there's a no true Scotsman tendency. And I cannot, as a woman, it's like even worse for me, which is why unfortunately men have to keep doing it, because I am socially just like punished or like heavily disincentivized as a woman to criticize the system from which I benefit. Like that's essentially what I'm doing. And so you're right. There is no way to really pin it down. But the, the thing is, they benefit from a sort of relative silence or reluctance to engage in the topic at all on the part of men. And that's why, like, I am happy to be the token woman among you who gives you permission to talk about feminism. But like, you don't really need permission to talk about feminism. You should just talk about it. And that's part of the problem. You can't, any men listening out there, you cannot defer to identity to then not like step up and like go have the argument. This is again what bothers me about several male intellectuals, including several on Substack, who are part of the heterodox community. They don't take the argument all the way. Like they don't do the thing that would actually mark them truly heterodox and like potentially suspect among, a non-zero amount of people. Like they don't actually take feminism on. They leave it to conservatives like Mary Harrington and like just others that I don't think it's not that their ideas are totally wrong. Louise Perry, Mary Harrington, but they want to return to a traditional sort of paradigm. And I don't think that's like sustainable. And that's why I talk about philosophy a lot, because you can just live in a post-feminist, post-traditional, I don't know, you can live in that space. Like that is a space that is accessible to people. Feminism doesn't really inherently. Okay, I was just to give you a personal example. I was at dinner last week, and it was with a friend who I bonded with over our shared love of Marxism, like way back in 2011 when we did Teach for America, which was a whole thing. And obviously, I have become a very different person since we met, and she has not. She teaches middle school in Providence, Rhode Island. And we were talking about how feminism provides, or I was making the argument that feminism provides moral cover for women to do shitty things and then morally absolve themselves of the consequences and responsibility for their actions, specifically when they destroy other women in the workplace. Like they can feminism wash that. And that's why, like, and said this separately, many women have actively sabotaged my career. And there have been several men recently who have helped me get ahead and like break through where I wouldn't have been able to. That's not to say that like there aren't women who have supported me in my career. It's just there are as many as have held me back. But this thing is verboten to say, like you can't do it without risking major social backlash. And so I recognize I'm asking people to risk social backlash, but I guess at the end of the day, there is no way to change things, right? There's no way to change things. Women have no incentive. We mutually police each other so we don't ever cross the party line. And you all like won't say it because you don't want to have a fight. So how do things change then? Like let me pose this to you. How do things change?
Well, I mean, they just keep losing elections, right? Because at the end of the day, I feel like that's kind of what happened in 2024, right? Like they won't. I feel like like especially what Baz said, it's like you want to pick up that argument with people, but you just after a certain point, you just make your peace in one area, and then you lose elections in another area, and then now people have to kind of kind of reconcile with it, right? So it's the same thing with the abundance agenda, right? If Kamala Harris got elected, there would be no discussion about men. There would be no article like, "Oh, men, where have you gone?" Right? There'd be no introspection, right? So I think at the end of the day, it kind of shows up in other places, right? It's kind of the male flight issue all over again, right? It's not like after a certain point, you're not going to try and make things work. You're not going to try and make the group work. You're just going to leave, and you're just not going to show up in the same spaces that they're at, right? Because you know that if you try to push back too hard, it's going to be viewed negatively, and it's going to be viewed as kind of like almost like a power dynamic, like you're kind of bullying them, right? So it's just, you go a different route, right? You create alternate structures. Now people are talking about trade schools instead of universities. People are talking about like male only groups, right? And people are talking about how to market to men, right? In terms of the Democrats.
Leftist Joe Rogan. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, it's basically, to your point, Anu. It's like when you try to speak out against other women, like, that I find funny is that it's infantilizing to you, right? Because people,
Yeah.
do they disagree with you? They think like, oh, you've been brainwashed. You
Yeah.
are not capable of rational thought, and therefore, if you knew what I knew, you would come to the same opinions as me, right? And so,
Yeah.
as much as I, write articles talking shit about feminism, it's like I at least take them seriously. Like I don't say like, oh, you've been brainwashed into believing the opinions you have. I say, okay, these are the things that you believe, and this is why they're wrong. But in some way, that's actually more respectful of their actual
It
position.
is.
Yeah.
Brainwashing. So, women used to be infantilized. That's why feminism came about, right? And that's one thing feminism was supposed to fight. But I feel like now we are self-infantilizing, and that is a thing that I'm trying to fight. So I appreciate that you noticed that. That does indeed happen a lot. You couldn't possibly know.
I wanted to say real quick because I wanted to hear what sort of predictions people had, what sort of solutions they had in mind. Anu, you said something super interesting that is something I've been thinking about and I've been building the case for, which is there is a post-feminist space. I think that's true as well. I think if you want to see what the future of feminism looks like without disparaging, women's gains in the workforce and education, look to Scandinavia, right? I call the Scandinavian model feminism to completion, because if you've been to Scandinavia, I used to live in Norway. Women the expectations for women were very different. Like if you go on a date with a woman in Norway, she will insist that she pays for her part of the date, right? And the same sort of hangups people have politically, or like the same sort of hangups that you see in American society, where people are like, oh, this guy's got to be this, it's got to follow this specific set of criteria. You see less of that in Norway. Now they're not making any babies, right? They're also, they've got their own problems, but it is, at least seemingly, when I was there, it felt a lot more fair. But whenever I bring that up, for some reason, people don't people aren't too excited by it. People aren't excited by that. So I'd be curious to hear where you guys see things going and what solutions there might be.
Back to the concept of brainwashing, what I've been thinking about a lot recently is that because I run into this a lot. A lot of my first subscribers were like real life friends of mine, and people who were reading my writing when I was much more like when I wasn't quite such a like heterodox dissident liberal. I was much more like I hate Trump, and that was kind of the same thing I was writing 100 times over. But I bump into this when you do talk about gender differences and you talk about men's preferences and how Democrats are kind of fallen down because they're not understanding what men want and that men want things. You get this idea that like that just gets added to the ledger of their crimes. So, oh, they voted for Trump. Of course they did because they're shit. The idea that we might actually be able to do something to correct this problem is anathema for some reason. I don't know if you guys ever run into that, but it's like there is no valid reason for men not to be voting for the Democrats. So if you've got a man who is either not voting Democrat or thinking about not voting Democrat, it is just further evidence of his dysfunction.
No, that's a thing I definitely see, and there's a lot in that. I think maybe there might be a part two for this discussion. I know we've kind of we've been talking for a really long time. Perhaps we can. Yeah. So
Everyone's hungry.
Yeah, and I know there's a bounce house that's been promised for you, promise to you, David. So I would never
Yeah,
want to be between. I'd never want to go between a man and a bounce house. So,
absolutely.
and so maybe we can just do this again. But this was a lot of fun.
Was.
I'd really like us, do this again. Shout out to Rohan, Anu, David. I will list all of their Substacks once I post this. This is not going to be a paid subscriber post. Just it's going to be public because I want everybody and their followers to be able to access it. So if you want to check out, each of these persons' Substacks, just look forward to the post and I'll have it linked. But thanks to you guys. Thanks so much for this. And if you have any
Thanks,
final
Beth.
thoughts, I'll yield the floor.
Yeah, this was a blast. Thanks, guys.
It was. Pleasure,
Cheers.
gentlemen. Thank you.
Much love, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.